My name is Emma and I'm 29 years old. 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and said 4 words that shattered everything. I thought I knew about family and belonging. Don't come home, Emma. The phone felt like a block of ice against my ear. Outside my apartment window, the November rain was hitting the pavement with a rhythmic, lonely thud. I could smell the faint scent of the pumpkin candle I'd lit just minutes before, thinking of the warm kitchen back home, the smell of roasted turkey, and the sound of my father's quiet laugh. I had my suitcase half-packed on the bed, a soft, gray sweater tucked neatly next to a pair of boots. What do you mean, Mom? My voice sounded small, like a child's. It's Victoria's year, my mother Linda said. Her voice was flat, efficient, as if she were reading a grocery list instead of breaking her daughter's heart. She's bringing her new fiancé's parents over. We need the guest room for them. And honestly, with the wedding planning, things are just too tense. You know how you get, Emma, you're so sensitive. And Victoria is under a lot of pressure. We just think it's better if it's just the family this time. Just the family. The words felt like a physical blow to my stomach. I was the eldest daughter. I was the one who had spent my teenage years babysitting Victoria, the one who stayed behind to help clean the kitchen while she went out with friends, the one who always took the acceptable sacrifice so she could shine. I'm your daughter, Mom, I whispered. My hands were trembling so hard I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. Don't be dramatic, she sighed, and I could almost see her rolling her eyes. It's just one holiday. You're a grown woman with a career in Chicago. Surely you can find something to do. We'll send you pictures of the dinner. The line went dead. I didn't move for a long time. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I looked at the half-packed suitcase. I looked at the gift I had bought for Victoria, a handmade ceramic vase. I'd spent weeks picking out. I walked over to the kitchen and blew out the pumpkin candle. The smoke curled up into the air, gray and disappearing, just like my plans. I thought about calling my father, Robert, but I knew what would happen. He would sigh, he would say, "You know how your mother is, Emma," and then he would stay silent. He loved me, I knew that. But his love was a quiet thing that never had the strength to stand up to my mother's loud rejections. I was 29 years old, and for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't have a home to go back to. I was a placeholder, a backup plan. And this year, the backup wasn't needed. I walked to the window and watched the city lights blur through my tears. I wasn't just losing a dinner. I was losing the illusion of being loved. Something inside me went quiet. Not sad, not angry, just empty. But as the darkness settled in, something else settled too. A quiet decision I didn't even fully understand yet. If I wasn't part of the family, then I would have to find out who I was without them. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster by the dim glow of the streetlights outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I didn't see the empty apartment. I saw the ghosts of 1,000 other moments where I had been pushed to the edges. The realization didn't come all at once. It came in waves, like a cold tide coming in. I started remembering the patterns. I remembered my 10th birthday. I had wanted a small party at the park, just a few friends and a chocolate cake. But Victoria had a gymnastics meet the same day. My mother had looked at me with that same efficient, flat expression. "Emma, don't be selfish. This is a big day for your sister. We'll do your cake on Tuesday." Tuesday came, and the cake was a store-bought one. Half crushed because my mother had forgotten to clear a spot for it in the car. I ate my slice alone, at the kitchen counter while they watched a video of Victoria's floor routine. I remembered my high school graduation. I was the valedictorian. I had worked so hard, staying up until 2 a.m. every night, my eyes burning from the glow of my desk lamp, the smell of bitter black coffee always on my breath. When I walked across that stage, I looked into the crowd for my parents. I saw my father, James, looking at his watch. I saw my mother leaning over to whisper something to Victoria, who was busy texting on her phone. They didn't see me take the diploma. They didn't hear my speech about the future. After the ceremony, my mother said, "That was long. Emma, we're going to Victoria's favorite Italian place for dinner because she's been so patient sitting through that heat." The golden child wasn't just a title Victoria held. It was a shield that protected her from ever having to consider anyone else's feelings. And I was the acceptable sacrifice. I got out of bed and walked to my small office nook. I'm a graphic designer. I spend my days creating beautiful, balanced layouts for other people's dreams. My desk was cluttered with sketches and Pantone swatches. I picked up a framed photo of us from 3 years ago. We were all standing in front of the Christmas tree. My mother and Victoria were in the center, their arms linked, glowing in the soft light. I was standing slightly to the side, half hidden by a branch of the tree, my smile looking tight and forced. I touched the glass over my father's face. He looked happy in the photo, but his eyes were always directed toward my mother, gauging her mood, making sure the peace wasn't disturbed. Why wasn't I enough? The question echoed in the quiet room. I had done everything right. I got the grades. I got the job. I never asked for money. I never caused drama. I was the easy child. And yet, easy just meant easy to leave behind. I remembered a specific afternoon when I was 16. I had fallen off my bike and scraped my knee down to the bone. I walked home, blood dripping into my sock, the metallic tang of it filling the air. When I walked into the kitchen, my mother was busy sewing a sequin onto Victoria's pageant dress. "Mom, I'm hurt," I had said, my voice trembling. She didn't even look up. "There are bandages under the sink. Emma, don't get blood on the rug. I just had it cleaned for the guest coming over tonight." I had bandaged myself in the bathroom, hot tears stinging my eyes, listening to the sound of her humming a song to Victoria in the other room. Now at 29, the wound felt exactly the same. Only this time, there were no bandages under the sink that could fix it. The grief was heavy, a physical weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I felt a surge of buried anger, hot and sharp, rising up. I had spent my entire life shrinking myself so they could have more room. I had been a ghost in my own family home. I sat in my apartment as the sun began to rise, watching the shadows stretch across my floor like long, reaching fingers. My father had a chance to call me back. He had a chance to say, "No, Linda, Emma is coming home." And he chose silence instead. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a cruel, mocking stillness. Usually, the city hummed with a different kind of energy on holidays. But today, the silence inside my apartment felt heavy, like a thick layer of dust. I woke up and instinctively reached for my phone, half expecting a text from my father saying they'd changed their minds, or even a shallow happy Thanksgiving from my mother. The screen was blank. No notifications, just the reflection of my own tired eyes. By noon, the smell of my neighbor's cooking began to seep through the vents. The savory, buttery scent of herb-roasted turkey and the sweetness of simmering cranberries filled my living room. It was a smell that should have felt like a hug. Instead, it felt like a taunt. I could almost hear the clinking of glasses and the distant peals of laughter from the apartment next door. I tried to keep busy. I pulled out my sketchbook, trying to lose myself in the sharp, clean lines of a new logo design, but my hands were clumsy. I kept seeing the empty chair at my parents' table, the chair that wasn't actually empty because a stranger, Victoria's future in-law, was sitting in it. I grew hungry, but the thought of cooking a meal for one felt pathetic. I opened my fridge, a carton of almond milk, half a lemon, and some leftover takeout. I pulled out a piece of cold, dry turkey from a deli sandwich I'd bought 2 days ago. I ate it standing up at the counter, the meat tasting like cardboard. The loneliness wasn't just a feeling. It was a physical ache in my joints. I felt invisible. If I disappeared right now into the gray Chicago fog, how long would it take for anyone to notice? My family was currently clinking glasses to Victoria's perfect future, and I was eating scraps in the dark. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I looked pale, my hair messy, my eyes red-rimmed. I realized I was waiting. I was waiting for them to realize they missed me. I was waiting for the guilt to hit them. But as the sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the city, I realized the truth. They weren't missing me. They were relieved I wasn't there to make things complicated. With my sensitivity, the anger I'd felt the night before had turned into a cold, hard knot of despair. I felt like a discarded toy. I had spent 29 years trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect non-problem, and my reward was a silent phone and a cold kitchen. I couldn't stay here. The walls were closing in, vibrating with the muffled sounds of other people's happiness. I grabbed my heavy wool coat and wrapped a scarf tightly around my neck. My boots clicked loudly on the hardwood floor, the only sound in the room. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an invitation. But I knew I couldn't spend another minute being a ghost in this apartment. If I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone, I was going to do it somewhere with actual food, with light, with life. I just had to find a restaurant that was still open in a city that had seemingly shut its doors to anyone who didn't have a place to belong. The wind on Michigan Avenue was brutal. a sharp blade that cut through my coat and made my eyes water. The city looked like a movie set after the actors had gone home, bright, lights reflecting off wet pavement, but the sidewalks were eerily empty. Most of the diners and bistros I passed had closed signs hanging in their darkened windows, their chairs stacked neatly on tables like skeletons. I walked for blocks, my ears turning numb and my breath hitching in the cold, until I saw a warm golden glow spilling out onto the sidewalk from a small, basement-level bistro called The Hearth. It was a place I'd passed 100 times but never entered, a cozy, tucked-away spot with ivy-covered brick walls. I pushed the heavy oak door open and a bell chimed softly. The air inside was thick and delicious, smelling of roasted garlic, rosemary, and fresh sourdough bread. It was packed. Every table was filled with groups of people, their faces flushed from wine and conversation. The sound of clinking silverware and laughter felt like a wave of heat hitting my cold face. I stood at the entrance, suddenly feeling like an intruder. I was the only person standing alone. A woman with silver hair tied in a loose, elegant bun approached me. She wore a deep green apron and had a pair of reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked at me, and for a second, I felt like she could see the dried tear tracks on my cheeks. "Just one?" she asked. Her voice wasn't the brisk, professional tone of a hostess. It was soft and melodic. "Yes," I said, my voice cracking. I cleared my throat, embarrassed. "I know you're busy. I can leave." She didn't move. She looked at the crowded room, then back at me. "Actually, dear, we just had a cancellation at the communal table near the fireplace. It's a bit lively, but it's warm. Would you like that?" I nodded, unable to find my words. She led me to a long, rustic wooden table. At the far end sat a family of 6, and in the middle, a couple was sharing a bottle of wine. I sat at the end closest to the crackling fire. The warmth of the flames immediately began to thaw my frozen fingers. "I'm Eleanor," the woman said, setting a menu down. "And that's my husband, Richard, behind the bar. If you need anything at all, even if it's just someone to listen, you let us know. No one should feel like a stranger on Thanksgiving." She patted my hand gently and walked away. I stared at the menu, but the words blurred. I took a piece of bread. It was warm, the crust perfectly crunchy, the center soft and airy. "I'm Emma," I whispered. "Nice to meet you, Emma," Marcus said. He didn't ask why I was alone. He didn't ask where my family was. He just started telling me a ridiculous story about a Thanksgiving turkey he once tried to deep fry that ended with the fire department being called. For the first time in 24 hours, the knot in my chest loosened just a fraction. I wasn't at my mother's table, and I wasn't being the acceptable sacrifice. I was just a girl named Emma, eating bread with a stranger named Marcus, in a room full of golden light. As I took my first bite of actual food, I looked up and saw Eleanor watching me from the kitchen door. She gave me a small, knowing nod. I realized I had been so afraid of being alone that I hadn't realized there was a difference between being alone and being lonely. My family made me feel lonely even when I was with them. Here, surrounded by strangers, I was alone, but for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel invisible. I felt a lump in my throat that had nothing to do with hunger. A man sitting across from me, maybe a few years older than me, with kind eyes and a charcoal sweater, noticed me staring blankly. He held out a basket of warm bread. "The sourdough is the best part," he said with a small, encouraging smile. "I'm Marcus. My friends are running late, stuck in the snow in O'Hare, so I'm currently the captain of this end of the table." The weeks following that Thanksgiving felt like waking up from a long, cold fever. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Victoria. For the first time in my life, I didn't reach out to explain my silence or apologize for a distance. I simply stayed quiet. I found myself returning to the hearth every Tuesday evening. It started as a way to get out of my quiet apartment, but it quickly became a ritual. I would sit at the small corner bar, the smell of wood smoke and roasted coffee clinging to my hair, and Eleanor would set a cup of herbal tea in front of me before I even asked. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders today." "Emma," Eleanor said one rainy Tuesday in December. She pulled out a chair next to me, ignoring the stack of napkins she was supposed to be folding. I looked at my hands. "I think I'm just tired of carrying things that don't belong to me." Eleanor nodded, her eyes wise and steady. "The hardest thing to learn is that you can't make someone love you by making yourself smaller. You're a masterpiece, dear. You don't need to be cropped to fit into a cheap frame." I felt a tear slip down my cheek, landing on the dark wood of the bar. I told her everything then, the years of being the easy child, the missed birthdays, the phone call that shattered it all. I told her about the guilt I felt for not being forgiving enough. Eleanor didn't offer platitudes. She didn't say, "But they're your family." Instead, she reached across the counter and took my hand. Her skin was warm and papery, her grip surprisingly strong. "Family is where you are safe," she said firmly. "If it isn't safe, it's just biology. Richard and we never had children of our own. We've spent 30 years turning this restaurant into a home for people who needed one. Maybe we were just waiting for you to walk through that door." Over the next few months, the strangers from that Thanksgiving night became the pillars of my life. Marcus, the man with the charcoal sweater, became a constant. We started meeting for coffee, then for long walks through the snowy streets of Chicago. He was a photographer, and he saw the world in light and shadow just like I did. He never pushed me to talk about my biological family, but he was always there to hold the umbrella when the wind got too sharp. One Sunday, Eleanor and Richard invited me to their actual home, a sun-drenched house filled with old books and the scent of lemon polish. Richard, a man of few words but deep kindness, showed me his woodworking shop in the basement. "Built this table for Eleanor 20 years ago," he said, running a rough hand over the polished oak. "A house is just wood and nails. Emma, a home is the people you choose to let inside." For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of should lifting. I should love my mother. I should be there for Victoria. But as I sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, eating a slice of homemade apple pie and listening to Richard tell a dry joke about the neighborhood squirrels, I realized I was finally experiencing what I had been chasing my whole life. Trust didn't happen in a lightning strike. It happened in the quiet moments. Marcus remembering that I hate cilantro. Eleanor saving me the last piece of lemon tart. Richard fixing the wobbly leg on my favorite desk chair without me even asking. I was learning that I didn't have to be perfect to be wanted. I didn't have to be easy to be loved. I was being seen, truly seen, by people who had no obligation to look at me at all. One night, as I walked home from the hearth, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my mother. "Victoria is stressed about the floral arrangements. Since you're a designer, send over some ideas by tomorrow morning. Don't be difficult." I looked at the message, the familiar sting of being used bubbling up. But then I thought of Eleanor's face and Marcus's laugh. I didn't feel the urge to type a long defensive reply. I simply swiped left and hit delete. The healing wasn't about getting an apology from them. It was about realizing I no longer needed one. The transition from winter to spring in Chicago is always a slow, messy awakening, but that year, every budding flower felt like a personal victory. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. The relationship with Marcus had shifted. From a shared breadbasket at a communal table to something deep and undeniable. It wasn't the frantic, anxious love I was used to, the kind where I had to constantly check if I was doing enough. Marcus's love felt like a steady heartbeat. One evening, we were sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by swatches of fabric and sketches for a new gallery exhibit. I was designing. The air smelled of rain and the Thai takeout we'd just finished. "Emma," Marcus said, his voice quiet but certain. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was warm, grounding. "I want you to know that I'm not just here for the easy days. I'm here for the days when the phone rings and it's her, or the days when you feel like a ghost again. You don't have to be convenient for me to choose you." I looked at him, and for a second, the old Emma, the one who was told she was too sensitive, wanted to apologize for being a burden, but Marcus didn't let me. He kissed my forehead, and in that moment I realized I had finally found a man who didn't view my heart as a project or a problem to be managed. As my bond with Marcus deepened, so did my place within the family at the hearth. Eleanor and Richard had become more than just mentors. They had become my parents in every way that mattered. One Saturday morning, Eleanor invited me to help her in the restaurant's herb garden. The sun was warm on my back, and the smell of fresh soil and crushed mint filled the air. "You've changed, Emma," Eleanor said, snipping a bunch of rosemary. "There's a light in you now that used to be buried under a lot of shadows." "I feel safe," I admitted, digging my fingers into the cool earth. "It's a weird feeling. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For someone to tell me I'm taking up too much space." Eleanor stopped and looked at me, her blue eyes piercing and kind. "Listen to me. In this garden, the lavender doesn't apologize to the sage for growing. They both need the sun. They both belong. You aren't taking up space, Emma. You are the space. That afternoon, a package arrived at my door. It was from my biological family. Inside was a thick, cream-colored envelope. Victoria's wedding invitation. The calligraphy was elegant, the paper expensive. But there was no note. No, we missed. You. No, I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. Just a formal request for my presence at a celebration of a sister who hadn't spoken to me in months. In the past, I would have agonized over this. I would have spent weeks wondering what to wear to make my mother proud, or how to act so I wouldn't cause drama. I took the invitation to Marcus that night. He read it, then looked at me. What do you want to do, Em? I want to go, I said, surprised by my own voice. It was steady, not because I need them to love me, but because I want them to see me. I want them to see that I didn't break when they let go. Marcus took my hand, his thumb tracing the back of my knuckles. Then we'll go. But we're going on your terms. And you're not going alone. I realized then that the blossoming wasn't just about finding new people. It was about the strength that comes when you stop trying to grow in soil that was never meant to sustain you. I was no longer a wilted flower in a dark corner. I was part of a garden I had helped plant. And for the first time, I was reaching for the sun. The preparation for Victoria's wedding was happening in a world I no longer recognized. But a different kind of planning was happening in the quiet sanctuary of Eleanor and Richard's home. It started with a conversation over Sunday morning coffee, the kitchen smelling of cinnamon rolls and fresh-pressed newspapers. Emma, Richard began, clearing his throat in that way he did when he had something heavy on his mind. He set his mug down on the oak table. Eleanor and I have been talking. We've spent our lives building a legacy, this restaurant, this home, and we've always felt like there was a seat at the table that stayed empty for far too long. Eleanor reached over, her hand finding mine. Her eyes were shimmering. We know we didn't give you your past, Emma, but we want to be your future. We want to make it official. We want to legally adopt you. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Adult adoption. It was a concept I knew existed, but hearing it offered to me, the discarded daughter, felt like a tidal wave of grace. It wasn't about a name change or an inheritance. It was about the legal declaration that I belonged. Permanently. Undeniably. You want me? I whispered, the old wound localized in my throat. Even with all the family baggage? Even when I'm not easy? Richard leaned forward, his voice a steady anchor. Emma, you are the easiest person to love we've ever known. It's the world that was hard on you, not the other way around. We want to be the ones who walk you down any aisle you choose. We want to be the ones you call when you have good news or a flat tire. We want to be your parents. The paperwork was filed on a Tuesday. Ironically, the same day I went to pick up my dress for Victoria's wedding. As I signed my name in the lawyer's office, the scratching of the pen sounded like a chain snapping. I wasn't just Emma, the girl who was told don't come home. I was Emma, the daughter of Eleanor and Richard. I felt a sense of safety so profound it made my heart ache. But as the wedding date approached, a different kind of fear settled in. My biological family didn't know about Marcus. They didn't know about the adoption. They didn't know that the girl they had pushed aside had been picked up and cherished by people they had never met. Marcus stayed by my side through every late-night panic. He held me as I cried over the bittersweet reality that I had to find a new family to feel what I should have felt at birth. You're not going back into that house as a victim, Marcus said one night, his hands resting on my shoulders as we looked at our reflections in the mirror. You're going back as a woman who found her worth in the dark. They can't take that from you because they didn't give it to you. We spent the week before the wedding at the hearth, surrounded by the chosen family who had seen me through my lowest point. They threw a small official daughter party, with Richard opening a bottle of expensive champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. As I looked around the room at Marcus's proud smile, at Eleanor's tearful eyes, at the staff who had become my brothers and sisters, I realized I was no longer afraid of my mother's coldness or Victoria's dismissal. The legal bond was just a piece of paper, but the emotional bond was a fortress. I was ready to face the past, not because I wanted to fix it, but because I was finally finished with it. The wedding venue was a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, all white roses and expensive champagne. It was a world of curated perfection, the kind my mother Linda lived for. As Marcus and I walked toward the garden, the smell of heavy floral perfume hung in the humid air. mixing with the scent of mown grass. I saw them across the lawn, my biological family. They looked like a picture-perfect portrait of privilege. Victoria was in her element, spinning in a gown that cost more than my college tuition, while my mother hovered around her like a protective hawk. The moment my mother saw me, her face didn't soften with relief. Instead, her eyes narrowed, scanning me from head to toe. She didn't notice the strength in my posture or the way Marcus held my hand. She only saw that I didn't look broken. "Emma," she said, her voice a sharp contrast to the soft wedding music. "You're late." "And who is this?" She gestured to Marcus as if he were an uninvited stain on the rug. "This is Marcus, my fiancé," I said, my voice calm and clear. "And we aren't late, Mom. We're exactly on time." The air between us turned brittle. Victoria walked over, her bouquet trembling slightly. "Emma, today is about me. Please don't start one of your episodes where you make everything about how you feel. We invited you as a courtesy. But if you're going to bring a stranger and cause a scene—" "A stranger?" I interrupted. I looked at my sister, the girl I had protected for 20 years. "Marcus isn't a stranger. He's the person who held me together when you told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. He's the person who knows my favorite color, my biggest fear, and the sound of my laugh. Things you haven't bothered to learn in a decade." My father, David, stepped forward then, his eyes downcast. "Emma, please. Just for today, can we have peace? Your mother worked so hard on this." "Peace, Dad?" I looked him in the eye, and for the first time, I didn't see a hero. I saw a man who had traded his daughter's heart for a quiet life. Peace is what you have when everyone is respected. What you have is silence, and I'm done being silent. My mother stepped closer, her voice a low hiss. "You are being ungrateful. We gave you everything. We are your family, your blood." "No," I said, and the word felt like a mountain. I pulled a small legal document from my clutch, the finalized adoption papers. I didn't need to show them, but I wanted them to know the boundary was now a wall. "You were my biology, but you stopped being my family when you decided that my presence was an inconvenience." I looked at her, really looked at her, and the fear I'd carried my whole life simply evaporated. I have a mother now who saves me a seat at her table every single night. I have a father who stands up for me without being asked. I'm not here to ask for your love anymore, Linda. I'm here to tell you that I don't need it to survive. The silence that followed was heavy. Victoria looked shocked, my father looked devastated, and my mother looked furious that she had lost her power. "Let's go," I said to Marcus. We didn't stay for the vows. We didn't stay for the cake. As we walked back to the car, the sound of the wedding music faded behind us, replaced by the sound of the wind in the trees. I felt light. I felt clean. I had stood in the center of their perfect world and realized I didn't want to live in it. I had spoken my truth, set my boundaries, and for the first time in 34 years, I walked away without looking back. I was finally completely free. The weeks following the wedding felt like the quiet after a massive storm. The air was clearer, the world seemed brighter, and for the first time in my life, the noise of my biological family's expectations had gone completely silent. I hadn't blocked them, I didn't need to. The boundary had been set, and they knew for the first time that they couldn't cross it. A few days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't from my mother or Victoria. It was from my father, David. The envelope was slightly wrinkled, as if he'd carried it in his pocket for a long time. "Emma," it read in his shaky, familiar script. "I watched you walk away that day, and for the first time I saw how much I've failed you. You looked so strong, and I realized that strength came from a life you built without me. I'm sorry I was silent when I should have shouted. I'm sorry I chose peace over my own daughter. I don't expect you to come back, but I want you to know that I see you now. I finally see you." I sat on my porch, the smell of fresh rain on the pavement filling the air. I cried then, not the jagged, desperate tears of the girl left behind on Thanksgiving, but the soft, healing tears of closure. I forgave him, but I didn't invite him back. Forgiveness didn't mean I had to put myself back in the path of his silence. I spent that summer in the kitchen of the hearth, learning the secrets of Eleanor's sauces and the rhythm of a life built on purpose. Marcus and I spent our evenings planning a future that didn't feel like a performance. We bought a small house with a big garden, and Richard spent his weekends helping Marcus build a nursery in the spare room. Yes, a nursery. When I found out I was pregnant, my first instinct wasn't fear. It was a fierce, protective joy. I stood in the bathroom looking at the 2 pink lines, and I made a vow to the tiny life growing inside me. "You will never have to earn your place at my table," I whispered. "You will never be the acceptable sacrifice. You will be chosen every single day." The healing wasn't a destination. It was a daily practice. It was in the way Eleanor knitted tiny yellow booties while we watched the sunset. It was in the way Marcus rubbed my back when the morning sickness got too much, his hands steady and warm. It was in the realization that I was no longer defined by the family who let me go, but by the family who held me tight. I started writing letters to my unborn child, filling a leather-bound journal with the lessons I'd learned in the dark. I wrote about the sourdough bread at the hearth, the strength of a quiet no, and the beauty of being found by people who were looking for you all along. I was no longer the girl waiting for a phone call. I was a woman building a legacy of love that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. My life was finally my own, and it was more beautiful than I had ever dared to imagine. The sun is setting over the garden now, casting a warm, honey-colored light across the wooden deck Richard built for us. I'm sitting here watching Marcus lift our daughter, Sophie, into the air. Her laughter is the purest sound I've ever heard, a bright, bubbling melody that fills the space where silence used to live. I look down at my hands. They aren't trembling anymore. They are steady, resting on the journal I've filled with our story. I've learned that the world often tells us that blood is thicker than water, but they forget the rest of that old proverb. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means that the bonds we choose, the ones we forge in the fire of shared pain and mutual respect, are often the strongest ones we will ever know. I look back at that 29-year-old girl standing in the rain in Chicago, her heart shattered by 4 cold words. I wish I could tell her that the empty seat at her mother's table was actually a gift. It was the universe making room for a much bigger life. I wish I could tell her that being discarded was just the beginning of being found. My life isn't perfect, but it is honest. When I look at Eleanor and Richard, I don't see biological substitutes. I see my parents. When I look at Marcus, I see a partner who chose me when I had nothing to offer but my scars. And when I look at Sophie, I see the future, a world where love is a given, not a reward for good behavior. I am Emma. I am 34 years old. And I am finally officially home. CTA section. If you're watching this and you've been the scapegoat of your family, if you've been told you're too much or too sensitive, or always causing drama just because you dared to ask to be treated fairly, I want you to know something. It's not you. It never was. You deserve to be chosen. Not as a backup, not as a last resort, not as the acceptable sacrifice when someone else's comfort is at stake. Chosen first. Chosen fully. Chosen without conditions. Family isn't blood. Family isn't obligation. Family isn't people who share your DNA but treat you like a burden. Family is the people who show up. The people who see you crying alone and invite you to their table. The people who open their hearts and their homes and make you officially, permanently, undeniably theirs. I spent 29 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. And then I spent 5 years learning what love actually looks like. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. It helps more people find these stories when they need them most. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing how far this story reaches. And if you want more stories like this, check the description. I've linked some of my favorites there. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be chosen.